Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of RSIS, let me also welcome you to this afternoon's distinguished public lecture. Professor Wu has been briefly introduced, but allow me to say a few words about him. Dr. Wu Xinbo has over 3 decades of research on Sino-American relations. As professor and dean of the Institute of International Studies and director at the Center for American Studies of Fudan University, Dr. Wu has widely been recognized for his expertise on China's foreign policy, US-China power dynamics, and the evolving global order. He has authored 6 books and numerous articles and book chapters in leading journals and international presses, including the International Affairs, Asian Survey, the Journal of Contemporary China, Columbia University Press, and Stanford University Press. He currently serves on the editorial board of the Washington Quarterly, the European Journal of International Security, and International Affairs. He is also a member of the Advisory Council of Asia Society Policy Institute and the Trilateral Commission. Dr. Wu, Professor Wu, speaks to us at a very timely time. Sorry for that redundancy. Today's geopolitical landscape, marked by several highly contentious wars, economic turbulence, and a shift from US hegemony towards multipolarity, has heightened global uncertainty, which is basically an understatement. For the Asia-Pacific, security dynamics are actively being reshaped amidst a rising China and a US pursuing a more transactional and demanding approach to its alliances under President Donald Trump's renewed administration. So with this extensive experience and scholarship, Dr. Wu is uniquely positioned to offer us his insights this afternoon on the scenarios facing the Asia-Pacific in this pivotal moment. It is now my pleasure to invite Professor Wu Xinbo, please.
Thank you, Melly, for your very kind and generous introduction. We met each other over 20 years ago, first in the US and then in Shanghai at Fudan University. Always a pleasure to be back to Singapore. I want to start to thank RSIS for inviting me to be Nian Gongsi Professor of International Relationship. The last time I was in Singapore was already 6 years ago, 2019. So back to Singapore in a time when the turbulence is shaping geopolitics and geoeconomics in many parts of the world. It's a great pleasure to say Singapore remains a place of prosperity and security, something one cannot take for granted in many parts of the world. Today, we are in the first year of Trump 2.0, and people are paying a lot of attention to tariff war, trade war, and geoeconomic rivalry. But at the same time, I think geopolitics is also undergoing tremendous pressure. And this is a time when geopolitics and geoeconomics are interplaying in somewhat negative ways, undermining rather than enhancing international cooperation and global governance. What I'm going to do next is in maybe 30 to 40 minutes, I will share you with my recent research on the evolving Asia-Pacific security landscape and how this will look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now. Because, Asia is not only the center of growth in the world, but also a place where major geopolitical rivalry is taking place among the major powers and also among the major powers and middle-level powers. Now, ever since the end of World War II, the regional landscape has kept evolved, and so far, at least, we have experienced 4 stages, 4 phases. The first was in 1950s when the Cold War started, and the Cold War style security landscape in Asia Pacific began to take shape. And this lasted for about 20 years. The second stage was 1970s, when the U.S. approached China and U.S.-China relations began to improve. We were still very much in the Cold War landscape, but there were some important adjustments to it. The third stage started with early 1990s, when the Cold War ended, and then we began to have a different security landscape in this region. And the very recent stage, the stage we are now in, started from about 10 years ago. After 2010, I would call this as the stage of Sino-US strategic competition. If you want to find a starting point, I would refer to Obama administration's rebalance to Asia strategy as the beginning of reshaping regional security landscape. So at different stages, this security landscape has very different characteristics. Now, here I'm trying to use a chart, graph, to show what are the differences among the 4 stages in terms of distribution of power, features of interactions among actors, U.S. role, and Asian role. Now, let's works. Let's start from the first stage in 1950 and 1960. The distribution of power in this region is largely binary, right? To bipolar system. And features of interactions among these 2 polars were confrontation. The region was divided into 2 camps confronting each other. The U.S. role in this security landscape was very much dominant, especially on the maritime. And for the Asian countries, their role was largely dependent, either dependent on the U.S. or dependent on Soviet Union. So that was the case in the 1950s and the 60s, the first stage of the security landscape. The second stage in the 70s and 80s, as I said, as China-U.S. relations began to improve, we somehow put an end to the Cold War between Beijing and Washington. And in terms of distribution of power in this region, it shifted from binary to ternary. That's China, U.S., Soviet Union. That's what we used to call strategic triangle, right? And the features of interactions among the major players is a combination of confrontation and coordination. Confrontation between US and Soviet Union and China and Soviet Union, and coordination between China and the United States. So that was the case in 70s and 80s. The US role in this region remained dominant in spite of the Vietnam War and its withdrawal from Vietnam, while Asian role became important because of China joined the strategic triangle. And the third stage we just mentioned started with the end of Cold War and lasted for the next 20 years. Distribution of power become multiple because not only US, Russia, China, ASEAN become active, Japan become active. And also the features of interactions among the players is a combination of non-confrontation and cooperation. Non-confrontation because Cold War ended, so there was no major strategic confrontation among the players in this region. And also largely driven by ASEAN countries from mid to late 1990s, the region began to embrace security cooperation, and China joined this process. And the US role at this stage actually became less dominant because of the end of Cold War. Countries in this region no longer required as they did the US security umbrella as it did in the past. So the US was less dominant of regional security agenda. And while the Asian roles are becoming more important, not only in China, but ASEAN countries, the ASEAN process, right? The last and the current stage was since the 2010s, maybe starting from Obama's rebalance to Asia strategy. Distribution of power remain multiple, while features of interactions now is a blend of balance, hedge, and cooperation, which I'm going to explain later. The US role actually becomes even less dominant than before, in spite of rebalance or Indo-Pacific strategy. But its real security impact on the region, its role is even less dominant. And Asian role are becoming even more important, China, ASEAN, and Japan in the last several years. So basically, that is the overall picture of the evolution of security landscape in this region. Of course, any chart or diagram is simplification, and it leaves a lot of details to be discussed. But I'm trying to use this to capture the major features of the evolution. Now, we are in the fourth stage, as I mentioned, started from 2010s. What are the majors of the current phase? First, I think now there emerged multiple actors: US, China, Japan, ASEAN, and very recently India, largely because of the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy. And India has taken more active posture in Asia Pacific. And in terms of interactions among actors, we have seen very complex balancing taking place in this region. China, because of its rising capability, is kind of balancing the US superiority in the region, especially on the maritime domain. While the US, of course, while the US, in terms of to maintain its power superiority, has attempted to rebalance China, starting from the Obama administration. Okay, and some other regional actors, let's say Japan, Australia, some Asian countries, they also try to balance a rising China. Okay, because they have their security concern about China, and as a result of this, we have seen the growing security interactions among regional actors. For example, U.S. has intensified its interactions with its allies. and also with its partners like Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, or India. And US allies, for example, Japan, has intensified its interactions with partners. Here I have one statistics showing that back in 2016, Japan's military, is so-called self-defense forces, had 7 times of joint military exercises with Asian countries. 2016, 7 times. Last year, Japan's defense forces had a total of 28 times of joint exercises with Asian countries. So you see the big increase of Japan's security interactions with regional members, and including with ASEAN. And this is also the case for security interactions between Japan and India, or Japan and Australia. And same time, we have also seen China's growing security interactions with Asian countries. Since 2010, China has conducted maritime joint exercises with militaries in Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, and ASEAN as a whole. Okay, and also the Chinese Army, Air Force, and Navy has conducted joint training with their counterparts in Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia. I think next week, China is going to conduct this kind of joint training with Malaysia once again, right? So that is the security interactions between China and ASEAN, and also, of course, between China and Russia. In the last several years, every year, China and Russia Air Force and Navy conducted regular joint patrol, mostly in East Asia area, in the air and at sea. So this is a phenomenon of growing security interactions among other players. And now, when we think about all kinds of security interactions, actually they have quite a different impact on regional security. If the security interactions are for cooperative purpose, then their impact will be largely positive. I think like China-ASEAN security interactions, because these do not target on a particular third party. So it's mainly to promote cooperation in non-traditional areas, maritime security, disaster relief, and also for the purpose of confidence building between militaries on both sides. However, if these security interactions are for competitive purpose, then their implication will be largely negative. Like, the U.S. security interactions with its allies occurred in the context of Indo-Pacific strategy or rebalance to Asia strategy. It targeted on China. So, of course, it undermined the strategic trust between two sides and sometimes raised the tension in this region. And still, for some interactions, they are hedging, like Asian countries. You conduct security interactions with both China and the United States, and may even with India for the purpose of hedging. And in that case, I think the impact on regional security is more mixed. Of course, sometimes it's not easy to clearly tell the difference between competitive interactions and hedging interactions. For some, it's competitive. For some, that's hedging. Now, what about the role of Asian actors. I think different Asian actors, they play a different role at this stage. For China, I think it has brought about structural impact. Structure in the sense that one, it changes the distribution of power in this region from US-dominated unipolar security landscape now to maybe, bipolar or multipolar structure, largely because of China's rising military capability. And also this is reflected in geographical terms. I mean, for example, for a long time, China had been mainly a continental power, right? While the US, enjoyed the dominance over the entire Pacific. But in the last 10 years, because of China's defense modernization, especially in naval defense modernization, actually China is pushing in the Western Pacific, undermining the US dominance in this region. So this is why I call China's role as structural impact. And as for Japan and ASEAN, their impact is largely on the balance of power, For example, if we think about China-US geopolitical rivalry, the position Japan takes is very important. Today, of course, Japan takes sides with the US. If Japan takes sides with China, that will change the power balance in the Western Pacific. And so is the case with ASEAN. ASEAN, doesn't take sides, but given the importance of its geopolitical location, if ASEAN takes sides between China and the US, that will have a major impact on regional balance of power. India, as I said, has become more active in the last several years. I think its impact is more on the scope and the posture of geopolitical rivalry between China and US. The scope means that they broadened the scope by, bringing part of Indian Ocean and also South Asia into Sino-US, China-US rivalry. The posture has to do with defense, offensive, dynamics between China and the US in this region. So that tells how different Asian actors have projected their impact on regional security. Now, sometimes, the mounting role of Asian actors not only shapes the dynamics for regional security landscape, as I just mentioned, but also informs of the regional security agenda. Why? For the US, its concern in this region has been largely traditional security, right? Major power rivalry, changing power balance. But for regional members, they care about traditional security as much as they care about non-traditional security, as Mali is in charge of the non-traditional security program at RSIS. So for many regional actors, their security concern features non-traditional issues as the number one security concern, while traditional security concern, wars and conflicts among countries, they are just secondary on their security agenda. So this is one change that Asian countries brought about to the regional security agenda. And also, Asian countries are more sensitive to regional conflicts, and their growing role in shaping regional security landscape contributes to regional security. What does this mean? Basically, I think the US, is inclined to solve the security challenges through the military means, through wars. Okay, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other wars it conducted in this region. while Asian countries, but Americans, I mean, they can come and go. If they win, that's good. If they lost, they just withdraw, right? From Iraq, from Afghanistan. But Asian countries, you just stay here, you cannot leave. So Asian countries are more cautious, in addressing their security concerns, even traditional security concerns with the use of military power, because they know this kind of negative impact, negative after effect of wars and conflicts. So as Asian countries are playing more eminent role in regional security, which means actually they are promoting rather than undermining regional security in many instances. And also Asian actors will introduce more Asian security concept and practice to regional security order. I still remember in 1990s when Asian countries launched this ASEAN Regional Forum, right, as a platform for regional security dialogue. And China was invited to participate. I think for China, that was quite a challenge from the very beginning, because we have to learn, how to conduct security cooperation with other countries. Because China, for a long time, had been, basically relying on, self-help for its own security. But now, with the end of Cold War, ASEAN began to push for security dialogue, security cooperation, confidence building, conflict management. So for the policy people as well as scholars in China, that was a very interesting learning experiences. And then in the last 20 years, China learning very quickly and come up with what we call the new security concept. At the first stage, it was featured by mutual trust, mutual benefit, equality, and coordination. So that was at the first stage when we participated in ASEAN Regional Forum. And in the last 10 years, we come up with a new version of the security concept, which is featured by common security, comprehensive security, cooperative security, and sustainable security. Sustainable security, for example, is that to promote your security, you have to develop your economy well. So economy and security are intertwined. I think many of the Asian countries have the similar ideas about the security concept, and also the practice in promoting regional security. Now, in this process, economic factors, as I mentioned at the very beginning, they also matter in shaping regional security landscape in the way that it affects the willingness of some actors to balance China and helps constrain the momentum for confrontation and conflict with China. I mean, taking China as one example. When the U.S. started this kind of rebalance strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy, trying to, weave in a regional coalition against China. Because of China's growing economic ties with regional members, some regional members, they just want to rely on China for economic reasons. So they wouldn't join the U.S. efforts. And some, they don't want to rely on China, but they also don't want to take sides between China and the U.S., like many in Asian countries. Still, you have some U.S. allies, they take sides with the U.S., like Japan or Australia. They participated in this Indo-Pacific strategy. However, they also seek to reduce the risk of confrontation with China because of economic interests in relation with China. So you can say, economic factors play a sophisticated role in shaping the security interactions between China and other regional members. Now, think about the future evolution of regional security landscape. Basically, I think there are two scenarios, okay, a tale of two scenarios. It very much depends on the evolution of Sino-US relations to a large extent. If there is a serious conflict between these two countries, that will result in a divided and a confrontational regional landscape, kind of a return of Cold War Europe, which we are familiar with. Okay, no matter who wins in this conflict, China wins or US wins, the result is almost the same, a return to the Cold War structure. And then, if in the next 10 years, 20 years, China and US can strike a grand bargain, as they did in the past, that will lead to a scenario featured with the interplay among multiple actors with a blend of behaviors such as cooperation, hedging, and competition. What does this mean? This means in a situation of Sino-US grand bargain, the regional distribution of power will remain multiple. And regional actors, not just major powers, but also middle-level powers and small powers, they can still play important roles in regional security. And the interactions among regional actors will be both cooperation, hedging, and competition, quite like what it is today. So if you compare these two scenarios, which one is good for regional security? Obviously, the second scenario. And the question, of course, will be, can China and the US strike a grand bargain down the road? We can leave the discussion of this issue to Q&A, but let me just remind you that in the last several decades, there have been two grand bargains striking between Beijing and Washington. The first was in 1970s, right, when Nixon came to China and opened for relations with China, and the strategic bargain was reached. Second time was in early 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, and the U.S. was confronted with the question whether it should engage or contain or rise in China. And then, finally, China and U.S. negotiated a grand bargain in which U.S. would continue to engage or rise in China, and China would join a U.S.-led international system, including economic system, and cooperate with the U.S. in dealing with some of the major regional hotspots. So that is the third time whether two countries are now, now locked in quite intense geopolitical and geo-economic contest, whether they can, find a chance to strike another major deal. So with that, I think I will stop here and open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wu, and I am particularly delighted that you took us through the historical dynamics of the regional security landscape in Asia. And I thought it's a very good background for us to look at the past to then be able to see what the future really holds, especially when it comes to the nature of this bilateral relationship and the extent to which the kind of security landscape that has been shaped largely by actors in this region would change significantly or dramatically. So I'm sure some of you have a lot of questions. And I will now open the floor for any questions and comments. In the interest of time, can you just keep your questions brief? Introduce yourself first. I am not, I'm visually challenged, especially at the back, so I would request you to raise your hands higher if you want to raise a question. So the floor is open, please.
May we start with the easy questions first?
Yes, sure. I recognize Manoj on the left. What we'll do is we'll take a couple or 2 or 3 questions in a row, and we'll come back to Professor Wu. Manoj, please. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Meli, and thanks, Professor Wu, for your talk. My name is Manoj Ajani. I'm from the Military Transformations Program at RSIS. So in your the landscape that you've sketched out, I really appreciated that you've taken us through sort of at that grand strategic level, but I'm very curious on your thoughts regarding the impact of domestic politics, both in China and the US, on this grand strategic level, because I think, at least from my observation, I think there's a greater and more visible impact today, but I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I have another question before we turn to Professor Wu? No? Okay, I'll have a follow-up to that. Many observers of US politics, when you're talking about the domestic development, will say that things will change post-Trump. That's another 3 years from now. And do you think the so-called damage, if I could use that this current administration has inflicted would actually last, or it will actually, after Trump, the relationship between China and the US will actually improve? Yeah. So 2 questions while the others are thinking about their own questions as well. So Professor Wu, please.
Well, these 2 questions are somewhat correlated, actually. Domestic politics always matter in terms of one's foreign policy or security policy behaviors in China, US, and other countries. But actually, if you look at the past grand bargain between China and US, as I just mentioned, in the US, one was done with the Republicans in power, one with the Democrats in power. And now, with Donald Trump coming back, there seems to be some different approach to China, to relation with China, as compared with his first term. The same president, different approaches, right? And on the Chinese side, I think the impact of domestic politics on its foreign and security behavior is less direct than in the US. We see more continuity in the last several decades since China opened up and began to reform. So I think to some extent, let's also take China and the US as examples. You see somehow the rising nationalism in both countries in different forms. In the US, there's maybe more economic nationalism, right? In the China, maybe more on the political and security side, especially when it comes to Taiwan issue, South China dispute, right? So on the economic side, China remains to be quite liberal oriented. But in spite of that, I think the good news is that in China, it is still the elite that makes, the policy elite makes the decision on China's foreign and security policy, even though the public opinion is always divided, very bifurcated on certain issues. So that means, yes, you have rising nationalism, and which has generated the impact on foreign and security policy from time to time, but it's largely manageable. In the US, taking Donald Trump as one example, He's very tough on economic issues, not only with China, but with allies as well. But I was told that at the very beginning of this year, he told his people that we can have a trade war with China, but not a military conflict with China. I think that makes sense as a businessman, right? So he knows, how to promote the best part of the U.S. national interest. So what I mean is that, in spite of the, rising domestic nationalism in both countries, two leaders are still inclined toward avoiding conflict, head-on conflict, and trying to negotiate a formula of relations that will, be kind of a win-win situation for both sides. So I think major powers, they always, attaches strategic importance when it comes to security and foreign policy. Unlikely just, driven by the public opinion. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, I recognize the guy behind me, and then one more on the right, please. Let's start with you at the back. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Professor. I'm Avnish. I'm the Chief Representative of the Confederation of Indian Industry here in Singapore. And I also represent the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers, which is an offshoot of our organization. But looking at the larger security context in the region, with whatever India has gone through with China in the past 6 to 7 years, what is your view on the element of trust that other countries will have on China in vis-a-vis their security, I would say, ambitions or geopolitical ambitions? Because clearly from our side, the border issue still is the status quo. It won't change, and it affects our negotiations as well.
You mean the trust issue?
Yes.
Between China and India?
India obviously has, but
Yeah.
Other countries will also go through the same sort of process.
Okay.
So how do you view that trust issue with China?
Please, the gentleman here on the right. Yeah.
I'm Brock Hirschberger. I'm a visiting fellow with the Military Studies program at RSIS. Thank you, Professor. It's been a good series of lectures to sit in on and get your understanding. My question is with regard to China's deepening relationship with Russia. Do you view that as any sort of impediment to a grand bargain of sorts, or a deepening relationship between China and the United States? And as a corollary to that, do you think there's any chance of a sort of arms control treaty program between the U.S., China, and Russia altogether, since the U.S. and Russia treaties largely have fallen apart?
I can take on one more question from this side. Okay, one more, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Wu. I'm Feng Yuan from NUS Center for International Law. Thanks for your historical presentation, and produced a lot of food for thought, especially for the cultural difference between US and Asian countries, that Asian countries are more likely to consider more about the war. So I got two questions. One is that would you show more on your insights on the strategic strengths and the weakness between China and the US, maybe from a historical and a cultural perspective, to show what do you think is most important, or the strategic strengths and the weakness of China and the US. What's their
Go to your second question now, please.
Okay. Second question is that when we come to the emerging technology cooperation part, if small countries in Asia Pacific area have to choose a side between China and the US, like we can take AI for example, because China and US are leading two leading parts. So what do you think? What will motivate them to choose a part? What are they looking more important to whether choose China or US? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good questions. Also difficult questions. China, India. Well, trust is always a problem for this bilateral relations from the Indian side, because my impression is that whatever China does, India believes it must be targeted on India. India believes it occupies a central position on China's foreign and security policy agenda, and which of course is not. I mean, India is just one of the 14 neighbors of China, and sometimes we pay a lot of more attention to relations with the US, with Japan, with ASEAN, with Korean Peninsula. Largely because of the historical incident occurred in 1962, India always, holds a kind of, anxiety, concern over China's intention, strategic intention towards India, and believes that the border issue really occupies a central position in bilateral relationship. Sometimes I would, ask my Indian friends to learn from China a little bit in dealing with these issues. For example, Taiwan issue, right? That's a core national interest issue to China. But if you look at China-US relations, since Nixon's visit to China, right? We have decided that put the Taiwan issue in a box and then try to develop cooperation in other areas, strategic security cooperation, economic cooperation, people-to-people exchanges. So Taiwan issue, as long as it's, put under control, China-US relations have dramatically grown in other areas, and which benefited both sides. So I think the border issue remains to be difficult to be resolved in the foreseeable future. Maybe it's more difficult for Indian leaders given its domestic politics and also its memory of 1962. So if we cannot solve this issue, leave it aside, put it under control, and try to develop cooperation between two countries in other areas that will benefit two sides. So in that case, gradually we, build the mutual trust, and which may somehow create a more favorable environment in which we can, approach the border issue. So that's my answer to your first question. Second, China, Russia. When President Trump called President Xi, actually, he doesn't view, when he talk about China-US relations, he doesn't view China-Russian relations as a problem. Instead, he asked China to, utilize our influence, if any, with Russia on the, Russia-Ukraine issue to push Moscow, toward peace talks. So I think in that way, Washington is realistic about the dynamics between China and Russian relations. So they are not asking China, in order to improve relations with me, you have to walk away from Russia. They know that is not realistic. But they know, because of the close ties between Beijing and Moscow, maybe at some point they can make the use of China's influence, if any. And sometimes I'm thinking about maybe in the future, the three leaders, they can sit together to talk about some big issues confronting the world. And if you look at the picture of the Victory Day parade in Beijing, President Putin standing next to President Xi, and when Donald Trump watches this on TV, he must be very eager to join them. He wouldn't view this as a problem. He would view this as a great opportunity. Strong leaders get together to make big deals, big and beautiful deals to solve the problem, right? So I think that is a different logic about this relationship. The relative weakness and strength of China and U.S. Strategy. There are many things to mention. If you want me to highlight one point, I think for China, the strength is the policy continuity. Okay, so today, this month, the ruling party in China is going to hold a very important conference to discuss the next 5 years plan, another 5-year plan. So every 5 years, China has a blueprint for its socio-economic development, and 1 year after another. So this one will be the 14th 5-year plan. And if you look at the past record, if China decided to do something, they are very likely deliver on that. Either, they deliver it in good time or in good quality, or both. So you see the steady progress every 5 years in social, economic, defense, development. On the U.S. side, I think the big challenge is discontinuity, right? You all know how the two-party politics play out in the U.S. and what will be the impact. Obama said he was going to, launch the project to build the high-speed rail in the U.S., right? But now, Trump just, tried to dismantle this project in California. And Biden wanted to promote the U.S. clean energy industry. And Trump, he wanted to switch to the, oil and gas, the coal, the traditional energy industry. This kind of continuity is a major strategic weakness in terms of a country, come up with a good roadmap and then, work to deliver on that. It creates a lot of waste in time, in resources, and sometimes it's just frustrated. So I think that's something we can compare between two countries. And speaking of weakness, what will be China's strategic weakness? In the past, I would say maybe we lack this kind of creativity, this kind of market vigorousness, as we say in the U.S. Government is capable and strong, but society and the market are not that as robust and dynamic in the U.S. But in the last 10 years, things began to change in China. If we look some of the technological progress, if you look at some of the lead companies like Huawei, Alibaba, DeepSeek, they're all private. So I think China is changing. You still have a strong and capable government on the one hand, but also you have, a very dynamic market forces and civil society pushing for innovation and creativity. The U.S. strategic strengths, if I want to mention one, is that it has its global network of allies, right? I mean, the U.S. has how many? 40 or 60 treaty allies around the world with 800 military bases around the world. That is a huge strategic asset to the U.S. I don't mean China should learn from the U.S. It's impossible. But that is at least the number one strategic strength for the U.S. when it comes to so-called strategic contest with China. Even though now Trump may not believe that is really asset to the U.S., it may be, in his opinion, it may be more a liability, right? Yeah. Oh, emerging technology. One more question.
Yeah.
Okay. I just very quick. I mean, how you reach out to other countries. Just give you the example about the DeepSeek phenomenon. DeepSeek followed open source, right? So it's open to everybody. Every user can adjust to it, use it for free. In the US, it's largely closed because companies, they want to make money. They want to charge you. So if your model is open, is free, and is advanced, of course, you don't have to invite people to use it. People just, automatically sign on to it. I think that's how China and US may compete in the technology area. Yeah.
Okay. I have, two on this side, Will, and the gentleman on the left, my left, yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Wu. William James, Assistant Professor in Strategic Studies at RSIS. Just have a question on the prediction you made about the grand bargain if one comes together between the US and China. You said that the behavior we might see in the region would be similar to today. I think you said cooperation, competition, hedging. I was wondering if that would apply to very close US allies who today would probably be characterized as balancing, so Japan and Australia. Because in that scenario of a grand bargain, you might think actually they'd feel more perhaps betrayal at the alliance leader than abandoning them for that grand bargain. So how would you predict they would react in that scenario? Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Please.
Thanks, Prof. Melly. Thanks, Prof. Wu, for your presentation. I'm De Xian from the Maritime Security Program here at RSIS. So my question is, in your slides, when you're referring to Southeast Asia, you use the ASEAN as a descriptor for the region. So I think there's a distinction between Southeast Asia and also where, as a region where each state exercises its own agency, as opposed to ASEAN as a regional institution. So I think you also brought up how the ARF has been historically important for China. In learning to engage in security dialogue with the region. But I think there's also been critique over the years about how ARF has diminished in strategic importance. So I'm just curious about your assessment, whether is there a role for ASEAN as a regional institution and its salience as an actor in the regional security landscape going forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, is there one more? I'd like to take one more. Okay.
Okay. What will be U.S. allies' reaction to a Sino-U.S. grand bargain, right? I think most of the U.S. allies would welcome this because, on the one hand, they may sense out that U.S. under Donald Trump is trying to reduce its military presence and security commitment to this region. And as a result of that, allies will be urged to spend more on the military and play a more important role in balancing China. And this has been, resisted in South Korea, in Japan, in Australia, because they say they have to make their own decision about what the percentage of GDP they should spend on the military. So they don't just want to follow Donald Trump's, numerical instruction. On the other hand, if a Sino-US grand bargain occurs, I think that will create better situation in which either Japan or South Korea or Australia to conduct their economic relations with China. I mean, China is already the number one trading partner to these allies, right? It's hard for them to stop trading with China. So I think it's just like, in the post-Cold War Europe, from 1990s to the fourth decade of the 21st century, I think this region really benefited from the dividend of the end of Cold War. So, most of the countries reduce their military spending and concentrate more on economic growth. So, maybe with the exception of one member in this region or two, most of the U.S. allies would welcome a grand bargain between China and U.S. as long as this doesn't compromise their own security interests. And for them, I think now they may worry more about Trump's inward-looking strategic posture rather than a Sino-US grand bargain. So that's my sense. Second, on ASEAN as a regional entity, I think some of the institutions that are launched by ASEAN in the last 2 or 3 decades have not been that successful, to be frank with you, including ASEAN Regional Forum, right? ASEAN Regional Forum and other regional security initiatives. However, I think the value is still obvious. That is, ASEAN did launch a regional process in the post-Cold War Europe in bringing all the relevant actors within this region and outside of the region to a regional platform to discuss the security issues. And particularly, as I just mentioned, China's security interactions with ASEAN countries in terms of the joint military training, joint military exercises. Had it been not, because of ASEAN process, do we have this kind of level of military relations between China and ASEAN? I guess not. So the institutions may not be that successful, but the process and to some extent the security culture that has been spread in this region are still very much relevant to today's security landscape. Without which the situation may be even worse. Okay.
Yes, I have a question at the back.
Hi, thank you, Professor Wu. I'm Dan Xu from Zaobao. I would like to move back one step. You mentioned about the grand bargain. Just want to ask for your assessment. How likelihood, U.S. and China is going to reach a grand bargain, and what will this grand bargain possibly encompass? Is this about maybe like trade that is concerning everybody, and could it also include other elements like military or even issues like Taiwan? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Is the question any more from this side? sorry, yes, madam. The lady on the second row, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Alice Cook. I'm from the British High Commission. This links a bit to what you were just talking about. I wondered if there is a scenario in which you think China might look towards more of an alliances model than its traditional partnership model in a security context in this region.
Okay.
And one more at the back. Jin, is it? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Wu. I'm Jin Yan from the Rajaratnam School. If I may follow up on the grand bargain question as well, I would like to ask, and you touched on this briefly in your remarks, in an age of multipolarity, assuming you also agree, what would this grand bargain, right, in the Asia Pacific therefore look like beyond just the US and China? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's 3 questions for you
Okay.
to respond. Yeah.
Well, I hope I still remember all of them. But anyway...
2 are on grand bargain.
Okay,
the other
I
one is
know.
the possibility of alliance arrangements.
Just kidding. You never forget these questions, good questions. Sino-US grand bargain, we call them grand bargain. That means that's not going to be very, trivial, very specific. I mean, look in the past. The first grand bargain back in 1970s. Basically, that was the U.S. was going to terminate its policy of containment against China, right? Open the door for engagement. Then on the Taiwan issue, that's one China. So that's what the U.S. did for its own part. On the Chinese side, okay, we cooperated with the U.S. to contain the Soviet expansion in this region. Especially, China played a major role on the Asian continent. So that was the first, the content of the first grand bargain. Then the second grand bargain in 1990s was also, quite simple in terms of the content. U.S. would engage rather than contain a rising China. Second, U.S. recommitted to one China policy. Okay, so that's it. For China, the offer will be, we will join the U.S.-led international system, particularly on the economic side, but also on the security side, because in the 1990s, China signed on to quite a few U.S.-led arms control and non-proliferation initiatives. So China joined U.S.-led international system, both on the economic and on the security front, and cooperated with the U.S. in dealing with some of the regional hotspots, like the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue and other regional issues. So that was the second grand bargain. Today, if we are going to have the third grand bargain, I think it's going to be relatively simple. The U.S. should stop containing and suppressing China on the name of strategic competition. And 2, reconfirm to one China policy, as it did in past. For China, we would say, okay, if that is the case, then China will reciprocate both economically and on the security front, so that we are do a lot of things to increase the purchase from the U.S. We will continue to support U.S. dollar's position. We will continue to purchase U.S. federal bonds, right? We'll continue to export rare earth magnets to the U.S. You name it. That's all Trump's concern these days. And also, we will further open up our service industry to the U.S. enterprises. On the security side, China may take, a easier attitude towards the Taiwan issue, okay? Because the U.S. reaffirmed to one China. So that helps reduce China's concern over Taiwan independence, etc. So we can take actions, jointly with the U.S. to reduce the tension in the Taiwan Strait. So I think it's kind of similar to what we see in the past. The only difference from the past this time is that this time China can deliver more economic goods to the U.S. than past because of China's rising economic and financial power. Next question, will China lean toward alliance over partnership in relation with some countries? Well, frankly, in China, there has been this kind of debate whether we should adjust this policy, confronting with the U.S. strategic pressure on China, whether China should ally with Russia or with, Iran or some other countries in this region. I think it's very unlikely that China will officially abandon this policy. However, you will see more substantive security cooperation between China and some of the partners, including Russia, maybe including Pakistan, including some countries in this region. So without a binding treaty of alliance, we can have more substantive cooperation. So that will leave more attitude, more flexibility to both sides. Because, if you look at China and Russia, I don't think China wants to be involved in Russia's military conflict with another country. Or to put it the other way, if China and the US come into conflict over Taiwan, I don't think Russia will get involved militarily on China's behalf. So we know the limit of this relationship. Yeah.
There's one question at the back, but could I ask you about the concern about the rules-based international order? Because I imagine that's one of the things that you're working on. And with the resurgence of armed conflict that we are seeing around the world, and one of them is caused by one of our closest partner, if you like. Are you concerned that there is a breakdown in the rules-based order that, as you said, also China adheres to? And in that light, are we also looking at an alternative to a Western-led rules-based order? I just wanted to get your views on that. And one for,
Hi, Professor Wu. Good to see you again. Chun Han from the Wall Street Journal. I want to ask you about the sort of global opinion about both the US and China. As you know, Donald Trump, since taking office, he has antagonized a lot of allies and partners, but at the same time, Xi Jinping has made a great effort to try to present China as a very responsible global power, contributing to global governance. And I think we see some of this reflected in one of the latest Pew surveys that show that favorability towards China has increased and favorability towards the US has declined. But at the same time, the US still maintains a lead. I was wondering, what's your take? Do you think there's a realistic chance that China can actually meaningfully close this gap? Or is there some sort of like a ceiling, structural factors that prevent certain countries from, feeling more favorable towards China, for example, in countries like Japan, South Korea, or even other neighboring countries? And a related question is, you talked a lot about structural factors in the US-China relationship, grand bargains and all that. I would like to get your take on the importance of personalities. So if it wasn't Donald Trump, if it wasn't Xi Jinping, if with the sort of trajectories that each power is taking still lead them towards taking similar actions and similar policies towards each other? Thank you.
Okay. Personality, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to entertain one more question because we're just before I turn back to Professor Wu. Any last questions? Okay, I think
we
that's
already
it.
get
Thank
enough
you.
questions? Okay. Rules-based order. I think the US-led Western-centered order that emerged after the end of World War II and renovated in the post-Cold War Europe is coming to a crucial juncture. Not mainly because of China, but mainly because of the US. Domestically, the US has become so polarized, and internationally, US feels tired and exhausted. So it doesn't see much, dividend in sustaining this current order. What will China do? I think China, to some extent, unlike Russia, we believe China is a major beneficiary of the current order in the last several decades, right? Because, globalization and economic incorporation. So we have achieved remarkable prosperity. Same time, we realize this order is not perfect. It needs to be reformed and improved. In the past, when the U.S., was a leader, Washington always tried to resist this kind of pressure from China and other developing countries to reform, the U.S.-dominated multilateral institutions. But today, there may be a chance that we can try to reform those multilateral institutions to make them more representative, more efficient, and sometimes to make its rules and norms more just and fair. For example, if you look World Bank and IMF, these two institutions, since their birth, have been led by Americans and Europeans. Not Asians, not Africans, not Americans. That's not fair, right? The leadership of these institutions should be selected on the basis of merit rather than, nationality. And also the US is the only country that enjoys the veto power in IMF, while its, percentage it holds of world economic share continues to decline. So I think we need to reform these rules and norms, make them more just and fair, and also, attracting the global South countries to join so that they can provide more resources to sustain these multilateral institutions and to, help the order operate on more sounder basis. So we see the problem with order and we need to improve them. The challenge, of course, is how to build the consensus among countries. That's going to be a long way to go. Chung Han's question regarding, this kind of shifting favorite rate towards China and the US. I think to some extent, this doesn't necessarily mean, you have more countries favor China per se, or less countries favor the US per se. It reflects more a kind of, preference for the value that China and the US each advocates for in today's world. What do I mean? If you ask these countries, you should take sides between China and US, I guess many countries wouldn't do that. That's difficult. However, if you ask them, you got to take positions on multilateralism on the one hand and unilateralism on the other hand, or economic protectionism on the one hand and open and free international economic system on the other hand, of course they will take sides. So I think in that sense, this shifting opinion really reflects, people in these countries, their preference for certain values in international relations. So that's a way I interpret this, changing favorability. What is the last question? Yeah. If I remember.
So will it be the position of China in this there?
Say it again.
Yeah, for the position of China. Is that the last question? Personalities. Oh, personalities.
Okay.
If there was no Xi, if there was no Trump, what things would be different?
I think the personality of leaders, they matter in the style of interactions or deal making, but they wouldn't dictate the terms of the deals to be made. I mean, as I mentioned, in the US in the past, you had both Democrats and Republicans that had striking deal, grand bargain with China. And in China, you had a Mao and Deng, right? Different leaders, they worked with the US for grand bargaining. So I think basically is the balance of power between two countries that is going to matter at the end of the day. Leaders, they only, implement, they are kind of working as an agent of the trend. They themselves do not, dictate the trend. So if China is not as prosperous and strong militarily as it is today, Trump wouldn't take China seriously. I mean, just like, the way Trump dealt with his allies, the tariff 10%, 15%, and no retaliation. But with China, the agreement is, okay, at the moment, the so-called reciprocal tariff from the US on China is 10%. And the US agreed that China can retaliate by imposing another 10% on the US tariff. No US allies enjoy this treatment. Why? Because of China's power and capability. So in this sense, I think, it's really the balance of power that matter in the interplay between the major powers. Yeah. That sounds too realpolitik.
Thank you. Structures rather than agency. Very interesting. Thank you, Professor Wu, for that, I think, very fascinating and very insightful presentation. You can see from the number of questions that you've received that there's been a lot of interest in the topic. I'd like to think that the regional landscape that you have told us, that you have reminded us about, will still remain. I think it's important for us, smaller countries in the region, and that we still have a say, despite this big structural powers that we have to deal with, and whose dynamics are also changing at a very fast rate. So it leaves me now to ask you to join me in thanking Professor Wu for such interesting and very insightful presentation. Please.